newspaper in the US to be created in the late 1800s. So we brought this idea back alive to, it started off first only in Arabic and then became Arabic and English. It's a quarterly newspaper that can be found in different places in Philadelphia. And now we've also expanded to Allentown. And so it has recipes, it has information about communities like alleys or certain type of architecture, interviews with artists. On the cover here, we used art from the People's Paper Co-op that was sold to go towards the community bail fund. So it's really like integrating and bringing together different groups across different divides. Next slide, please. And this was part of a project, you know, in this case, it's you creating a city panorama that maps the history of resistance of Philadelphia across time, place, people, and organizations, and creating workshops out of it to look at and connect different scales and places together in history and how it's not really linear, even though it's presented in a linear way on these maps. Next slide. And lastly, another example is doing public space cleanups with art activities to put up around the neighborhood. So this was a project years ago in Egypt that really began with wanting to open up public spaces, which are typically locked to the public. And a community member would have a key. And so we would, you know, open it up and clean it up and clean around the whole neighborhood and create art activities with the kids. And it was a way of bringing together both the kids and in the neighborhood, who a lot of them work in the, not the children, but the families work in the buildings around and bring people across class together to do these types of activities. So my work is more about creating opportunities for social encounters that people can really learn about themselves, others, and new forms of knowledge to build a more compassionate and understanding world. One of the key aspects are supporting people in finding their own agency, as other artists have mentioned earlier, and building leadership skills. Like I said, this isn't really typically being an artist in the typical sense, but it's really looking at the art of creating social encounters.
Thank you, Nora. Josh, do you want to cue up the next question?
Yeah, sorry, I'm also taking notes here. So if you see me scrambling or a little slow, it's because I got a couple screens going on. So for the next question, maybe we can keep the same order if that's all right with y'all.
Yeah.
What is it like working as an artist, and or you know, in the various ways that y'all define that? Slash working as a community-based artist.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. What is it like working as an artist? And or, you know, understanding that projects are different over time and your definitions are different. What is it like working as a community-based artist?
I'm gonna say, for myself, as like a quote independent artist, means that, I mean, I kind of have to like map out this like schedule of like all of this self-pushed work in a way, right? Because in order to, or for me individually, in order for me to be able to accomplish the type of projects that I want to accomplish, which I'm sure that happens with a lot of community projects as well. Like I apply for grants and I apply for funding and I apply for a lot of open calls and like different opportunities. So it takes a lot of like disciplined time and investment in ways that maybe I didn't understand before. right? Because at some point within my career, I was like, I want to be an artist, but that is a lot of labor. And then also in a parallel way, having a like close to full-time practice that explores my work in all of the possible ways that I can physically and mentally process. And then I'm also an educator, so I teach, and it's just like kind of trying to create balance between these ways that are taking and giving. Yeah, I think for me, community involvement really depends on like how and like where I am. If I'm in Puerto Rico, I am like a lot more free to be going from community to community versus like currently right now I am in California, and I feel like my time here has been spent like kind of learning more about the different communities like mutual aid and kind of just researching like where I am and how to at the same time be a person and someone who can use their skills or like their art in a way that is like productive for the community. And because I went to undergrad, or I my first migration place was Lancaster, then that also has like a different tie. It kind of really is like in flux, sort of depending how and where. But in individual practice, I would say that it it takes a lot of like self advocacy and discipline. And I don't know, that is really hard sometimes, a lot of times. I think that would be my answer.
Should I just jump right in? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
So sorry. It's that I'm so slow to mute and unmute.
No, it's okay. So being a community-based artist or creative, it's rewarding being from this community specifically. The people that interact with me today or come out to see my shows or collaborate with me, they know, a lot of them know me from like growing up here. And I think that's what makes, who I've become very beautiful, because the students that I work with that, are at risk, that are dealing with a lot of tough emotions and experiences that are hard for them to navigate as children. I went through those things and I was able to utilize the arts to heal and help, others navigate through those experiences and seek healing themselves. However, being a community-based artist, you're very accessible. So a lot of times, yes, speaking frankly, people don't know boundaries. So that's something that you have to learn how to set your own boundaries, and you have to stay true to yourself. Just as they said, self-advocacy is very, very, very important. So I had to learn how to set boundaries. It can be very draining at times, because I think there is a very thin line between being an artist and a creative and being called on to do other things in your community. So it kind of merges artistic work with like activism and different things that are going on in the community, where the artist starts to play a bunch of different roles. And because you're passionate about it, you have to ask yourself, what am I doing out of passion? I want to speak on these things. I want to show up in this way. But then at the same time, you need to survive, and you need to be paid for your work and your ideas and your creativity. So I think it's a challenge there, because you don't want to feel like you're charging your community for the work that you're passionate about. But at the same time, your livelihood, and you still have to pay bills and things like that. So it can be a little bit challenging, and there is a lot of pressure to it, but it is very, very rewarding to be able to give into the community that raised you up and help it progress and grow as well. Sorry, I didn't talk about any of those things, but I'll get back to those slides.
I was actually gonna just jump in really quick. I feel badly that everyone is likely staring at a very bright yellow screen right now. So I think what I'm gonna do is stop sharing so that the speakers are up front. And then when y'all want me to share a specific image or slide, I can do that. Is that an okay pivot?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, save everyone's eyes a little bit.
Lena, sorry to interrupt, but I'm actually going to ask you as I start my next question to go into the slide.
That's yellow screen.
We picked that yellow to wake everybody up, by the way.
So, yeah, starting with the Discerning Eye poster. Yes. So my start as, I guess, a community creative, I guess really started it almost in an antagonistic way. I came from a background of activism and, you know, against the man and this and that, against the establishment. And as I started the organization, and so Discerning Eye is an arts advocacy organization that I started in 2010. This was our first flyer for our first event. And Discerning Eye became the voice for the underground arts at the time, you know, in this area, I guess you could say the northwest side, northeast side of Lancaster. And I say that very specifically and purposefully. So yeah, the First Fridays had just started popping off and lots of people were coming into town. But any artists that, you know, were trying to make their way in this city were regaled to coffee shops and, you know, not much more. So the beginning of my art advocacy and my like community advocacy was started sort of in an antagonistic way against Prince Street, Gallery Row, and the art establishment. And it did take a little bit of time and I guess maybe maturity to realize that, you know, there was a place for the mainstream and there's a place for the underground. And it really became more of a symbiosis than an antagonistic endeavor, I guess. So yeah, we created a space that was necessary. I knew for myself as an artist that I wanted to begin having conversations. I wanted people to be talking about the art and not just going out. Actually, I have to just interject and say the very first thing I started before Discerning Eye was a group on Facebook called I Go Out to First Friday with a Discerning Eye and Not for the Wine. And that's how all of this started, because I was really getting upset. All I wanted to do was have a conversation about what we were looking at, and that was nowhere to be found. So that was the beginning of Discerning Eye. And, you know, as again, I realized that the relationship that I could create with the community could be symbiotic and helpful. It branched into more, what's the word I'm looking for? More avenues, more outlets, I should say, more media outlets. We then got we started a newsletter featuring local artists and starting conversations about the work that they were doing, and also the Facebook page and eventually an Instagram page. And I started to connect with my friends who were also entrepreneurs at the time. Rachel Adams was one of my best friends, and she was her and her tattooed, you know, self, punk rock self, was started a creperie in Lancaster, and it said, you know, everyone said it would never work. And we worked together, and I realized that really working with not just the art community, but the community at large could be really helpful to expand all of our efforts and grow together. You can go to the next slide. So in that vein, I started to, as the Discerning Eye, again, advocate for art and local artists to the non-art community. And that was really difficult. I have to say, like, trying to convince people that art is important and artists should stay local, and the financial benefits, the social impacts, like all of these things, because like the other artists have said, like the other creatives have said, that so much of it is about activism, and so much of it is about our history and our cultures and, you know, who we are as people. And to just like poo-poo that aside and say, ooh, I just want to drink wine and, you know, have an air about myself is not the environment that I wanted to encourage. But what we could do is work together with local organizations and local businesses. So the photo on the right, I think it would be on the right for you too, is a First Friday event that we had at Seasons Olive Oil and Vinegar Tap Room. And the artist there is, oh my gosh, George Weiss, and he was a photographer. And I was able to make a lot of these connections with local businesses who were really struggling to get folks in the door. And I said, hey, if you open yourself to art and open yourself to local artists and invite this other community in, it'll not only benefit us, it'll benefit you as well. And so, you know, I use this example that an Olive Oil tap room is hopping on a Friday night because of what local artists were able to pull together. The photo on the left is just another example of an event that we helped with at the tap room, helping Lee Noble and Christian Herr. This was so many years ago, I don't remember the year, honestly. I'm sorry for anybody that was involved. But yeah, they had a book release, and you know, Christian was a local artist, Lee and an author, and we all pulled together to make this event happen. And you know, that's just more examples of how working within the community could help bolster everybody instead of having an antagonistic view. I think the next slide. Yes. So on the left there is actually another event that I did at Millersville. This might have even been 2010 as well. And this was how to engage the community through art. And the other panelists were the duo from Printeresting, a local print blog, or I'm sorry, not a local print blog, but they had a pretty popular print blog going on. Henry Geffer, who is also a local artist. And please forgive me if also, and the Millersville audience, I do not remember this particular professor's name, but she was also very helpful in the conversation of how to engage communities within the arts and through the arts. And it was a really great experience for me to learn and also to speak on my experience at the time, which, like I said, was difficult, and convincing folks to include art in their lives was a tough one. But luckily, Lancaster is one of those places that's really special and accepts and really opens the door to folks who are trying something new, or, you know, at least in the arts, they were open to it. So what you're seeing on the right is the MFE Keys to the City, or Keys for the City project, where MFE, which is Music for Everyone, is a local organization, and they purchase a number of pianos to put around the city and then work with local artists to decorate the pianos and really create a beautiful experience for Lancaster City residents and tourists. And that was another thing that was pretty big for Discerning Eye, or me as a creative advocate to engage all sorts of people. And so this was my project with a few PCAD artists, and that was our contribution to Keys for the City. And yeah. Yeah, I don't want to talk for too long on this topic, but let me just continue on. We'll go really quickly. So the next engagement with the community was our physical space. Discerning Eye, I forgot the name. Discerning Eye Center for the Arts. Discerning Eye Center for the Arts was our physical space that we were so lucky to acquire in 2014. And we were able to really, this was our ticket to having a greater impact in the community, where we were able to open our doors and invite children, different organizations, artists, groups, everyone that was possible under the guise of the arts, you know, and it was really a special place, and I miss it dearly. I'll end there.
Thanks so much, Hoa. A lot of what you spoke about really resonated with me in terms of a lot of the work that I've been engaged in. As a community-based creative, it's really about letting the community take the lead for me, take the lead ahead of me, rather than, you know, in a lot of projects that I've worked on, there's been ideas of certain projects to be created, but there has to be some sort of flexibility in direction and product. You know, some of the things Hoa was talking about activating exhibitions from passive to engaged, you know, and bringing art into unlikely spaces. I'll mention the Friends, Peace and Sanctuary project a lot because it took a lot of there were a lot of different pieces to that. And one of them was about bringing art into unlikely spaces, bringing it to City Hall, having, you know, an exhibition about the history and politics around what it means to be a refugee in America today, and having, you know, these definitions of displaced, thinking about how do these global issues connect to the local. And like I said, looking at what is this idea of displacement and how do we see it more broadly, and making sure that that's outside of the doors of the head of city council. And like, you know, to add to that, we were, you know, this was an exhibitions project, but we made sure not to just have these exhibitions at City Hall, at the Free Library, at a traditional contemporary art gallery, at a bookstore. It was really about creating programming that brought people together to experience what actually happened and was experienced in the project. So another way that we used art as like a way to build bridges was, you know, through this project, one of the Syrian collaborators was like, I want to thank public servants for, you know, not, you know, say asking me who I am if in order to come, you know, to my to save me or help me. And so the group decided on wanting to go to a fire station in the neighborhood that most of them live in. And so, you know, if I had gone to them just being like, hey, some Syrians and Iraqis want to cook you food, they might not be so open to it, especially being that they're all white and, you know, have a very particular history and background. Many of them come from the military, et cetera. So the idea was sort of like, what are you thinking? But because I brought it to them through an art project, you know, explaining to them, you know, having materials to share with them and, you know, continuously following up, they sort of, they then became very open to the idea, and it was a very successful thing. Again, no physical art was necessarily created out of that, but relationships were being built. And that's a lot of being a community-based artist. It's taking time to have conversations and house visits and making tea and making food and sharing over spaces and creating friendships, you know, based on experiences or shared interests and hobbies. One other thing Evita said, which is really important in community-based art, that I had challenges with for a very long time and only learning how to deal with is that building of boundaries and setting boundaries. It's really easy to get wrapped up in feeling the urgency of like, I have to get these things done. And, this is so important. If I don't do this right now, I'm going to let people down. And the reality is you got to take care of yourself and you got to make that space to take care of yourself. And, part of getting wrapped up in this urgency, and this is again, something I'm working on daily, is that is capitalism. Capitalism tells us everything is urgent. And everything needs to get done now. And yes, there's a lot of crises and urgencies that exist, no doubt. But the perpetual pushing ourselves and letting everything in is a product of that, and a tool of white supremacy that we need to really think about how we enact that on our bodies. So my work is more about process, which we'll talk about, I guess, in the next question.
Thank you so much. And thank you for drawing connections between the previous answers too. So we're gonna start again with Jez. The next question is, just wanna make sure I got it right, so I'm pulling it up on my phone. What kind of artistic processes are part of your work? And let me know if you want me to share anything since I'm not sharing my screen right now.
Can you share your screen? But also, my neighbor just got here and my dog might bark, so I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'll mute myself if he barks. My animals are wild today. Wait, can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
It's all good. It's totally fine. What are some of the processes that are part of your artistic practice?
I guess in order to answer that, I should say I wasn't really involved in art in any way, like growing up. Like nothing at all. I didn't really have like art focused classes or anything. And it wasn't until I migrated to the US as an adult that really what brought me to art was making photographs and kind of like, I don't know, I think everything I tried before sort of failed in a way. Like in Puerto Rico, I went to school for political justice for like 2 years. So I have these previous kind of like social, political, cultural like interests, but art really wasn't part of my identity in any way. And in Lancaster, I tried to go to school at Millersville, but I don't know, it was like the wrong moment and it just didn't work out. And it kind of sort of worked out that I was able to go to art school, but I went into the art world being a person that had never done anything with art. So I had a lot of catch up to do. Within that, my work just kind of evolved from photography to video and anything really that I can make. Like I make Adobe tiles, I work with plants that are from my grandmother's yard and from other places in my hometown. And I also do performance, but entirely it is like rooted, and the energy that comes into making work is through my connection to my hometown and my family. So it project-wise, it kind of depends. I try to teach myself as much as I can. But really the process of my work is like understanding my relationship with people that are really close to me and understanding our relationship through distance, understanding the relationship between different cultures, and kind of how do we navigate all of these ways and forms of being throughout kind of putting a visual to it or layering it in different ways. It really is like about the interconnections between myself and the closest people to me. I did want to say, the first place that I ever showed, I think, was at the Discerning Eye. And I think we had like that girls show, because actually there was nowhere that would show my work, and it was really difficult. And I don't think that I was like, okay, so I'm gonna get this degree and I'm not gonna be an artist. I don't know, like that was sort of like a mentality that I had. And I think after that show, which had like, or that exhibition had like so much energy, that like something like that really pushes you to kind of keep trying and making like these other connections. So I'm really glad that Hawa brought up like the Discerning Eye, because when thinking about this presentation and everything, I was like, wow, that was like my first show in Lancaster. But anyways, process wise, it really is just sort of this like connection. It really is about connection. And honestly, a lot of the relationships that are built either in the art world or outside of the art world through my work are really based on the relationship that I have with my family. And not all of the work is mine. Like my sister and my brother, they will send me pieces that they make, and I sort of just edit it into my work, obviously like always having a conversation about what is included and what is not. So I don't ever feel like I'm a main artist in anything. I mostly sometimes feel like I'm just an editor and sort of like an archival, unofficial archival of kind of like our stories. I hope that answers.
Yes, that's a great answer. Thank you so much, Jez. And Evita,
we can go to the slide of Black Voices. Yes. So a lot of my artistic processes, they come from observation, they come from reflection, and I am very, very connected to my ancestors. That's just a process that is very hard to explain, but I stay connected in different ways. I try to stay grounded so that my work is it's powerful, but it's very intentional to relay a certain message, or should say convey a certain message that speaks to the souls of the people that engage in my artwork. And Black Voices was one that that sprouted out of a lot of the things that were going on this summer with the unrest, with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the countless other names that, you know, we were all processing all of these feelings and all of this rage, and you know, we're in a constant state of trauma. And I wanted to do something. I created an action plan through Speak to My Soul. And there were 3 points on the action plan. One of them was to create a publication. And originally it was supposed to be monthly, was to create a publication where we can express ourselves. And I was at a lot of protests, and I realized that a lot of people, you know, we've been locked down for months, and we were out on the streets, you know, I guess processing everything at one time, but there was still hurt and enraged, like everyone was enraged at the same time as well. And I realized we didn't have anywhere to go. All of the stages have been shut down. You know, the arts have really been taken away from us unless we quickly pivoted into something virtual. And that wasn't the case. So I wanted to create something where we were able to talk about the things that we were going through and experiencing, but it wasn't being exploited. So I saw a lot of organizations and businesses that were not, you know, people of color owned businesses, and they were reaching out to a lot of the Black community, asking for their experiences and asking if they can publish stories about them. And not that they never done this in the past, but it was excessive. what I started to read, when I started to read a lot of these stories or have these conversations with these different businesses, a lot of the stories were watered down. And I didn't appreciate that, because we needed to heal. If anyone needed to heal this summer, we really needed to heal. And I'm always focused on healing my own community. So I said, you know what, I'm going to take my time with this. And if it takes a year, if it takes a few months, it's, you know, we're going to make sure it happens. But I wanted to make sure that all of the collective stories in there really told the Black experience, but not just from my view, because as a poet, like I talk about my, you know, my experience a lot, but, you know, when we put all the stories together in this one magazine, it tells the stories, the collective story of the Black experience. So one person's processing of what happened this summer may be much different than mine, or someone may have advice for things like that, you know, if anything like that happens in the future. So it's a way that we can communicate and learn from one another. It also shows us as humans with stories, with real emotions that sometimes are overlooked because stereotypes are so blinding and people are so afraid to get past the things that they think, their perceptions of you. So that was the intention behind Black Voices. And yeah, I just talked to a lot of people to, you know, get that going. I'm not sure what the next slide is, but we can move on to it. Black Herstory is a single that I put out, and it's two spoken word tracks. And basically, I've been feeling very, very suffocated in being silenced. And a lot of that is because I've always been very vocal about injustice and systems that, you know, mishandle us as Black people, Black artists, as people of color. And I started to realize that I was becoming, I was being, like, people were gaslighting me a lot and basically saying like, oh, it's not this, or kind of like white-splaining what I was feeling instead of listening and following through with some type of action. So I wrote 2 pieces and I dropped it on, you know, all digital platforms. One is Dear Black Woman, and it's telling the story, well, it's telling Black women that they don't have to be like everyone's superheroes. And I realized over the summer, and just in history, Black women have usually had this trait, well, there's a stigma saying that we can't feel, we can't process our feelings because we're either angry, bitter, but like we're always told, like we're always at the forefront of a lot of the resistance and the forefront of a lot of creative renaissance and organizing and things like that. And we end up so drained, but because we're supposed to be strong, we aren't able to really like feel and heal and move forward. So I wrote a letter to Black women in there, and I wrote another song, well, spoken word track called Free. And it's basically talking about the ups and downs that we have been feeling, and I have been feeling this past year. So I kind of used my art to talk about the experiences that I was going through in the past year or so. We can move to the next one. I added this picture because this is a new element of creativity that that we found, and it's we're making wine in that picture. We're actually siphoning it into a bottle, and I feel like learning a different form of art, a different way to create, is also a different outlet for me. I'm very, very into learning how people connect. And I noticed that a lot of us go out, we connect over wine, we connect over different, you know, books and things like that. So being able to create something that connects people together, it also takes us away. So if you have a glass of wine from Italy, you know, even if you've never left your home or your area, you still get to travel in that sense. So that has taught me a lot in my process. I think that's it for those slides. That question. I'll get to that next.
Thank you, Hawa. Do you want to talk about processes in your artistic practice?
Yes. First of all, I just want to say 2 things. First, I hope maybe there's a way to like connect. Well, frankly, Avita, I need to hear that Dear Black Woman like really badly. So please drop a link or something.
I
'Cause
got you.
feel that. I feel that. I feel that. And also, before I start too, I want to say, yeah, Jez and Selena. Selena, can you go to that DECA, the opening flyer slide with the heart? Because I just want to point that out and say, like, I see a lot of, or a couple of names in the Zoom call that are on that list. And it's just so exciting. Jazz, I hear you when during this time in my life, you know, I wasn't particularly an artist, but I knew that I wanted to help facilitate people making things, right? I wanted to facilitate people using their creativity, using their brains, using their gifts. And I totally hear that as a student coming out of art school. If there's no place for you to do the thing that you're trying to do, what is the motivation to continue to do it? So that was a real driving force behind the DECA, was really facilitating and giving people the space to create. And it is really exciting because, yeah, those are totally my BFFs. Y'all are my BFFs, and it's just so nice to see a lot of you still doing the thing. So going back to my process, how I can speak to my process is this. I mentioned this a little bit in the beginning about how my goal is observation, really, and observing what's missing or what's needed is my strength. Also, I personally find uniqueness like one of the most important factors in like progress in the world. And whether it's my own unique ideas or championing the unique ideas of others, is really just, I think, the most important way that we succeed as a culture, a collective culture. So also, I have Uranus and Taurus, and this is like the unique idea like stronghold in my psyche. So through over the years, I would say I have taken different leadership courses. I participated in a leadership course called Create Karma, which was leadership and yoga instruction, breath and movement therapy, I also like to call it, although it is not official. But trying to release everything else that's in the way so that the creative idea can come through has been my process. And so facilitating the arts in Lancaster and facilitating space for people to create is how it started, through arts and visual arts. Then it moved on to, like I said, yoga teaching and meditation. Just pause on that real quick, please, Lena. And helping others to clear the space so that their creative juice can come through. If you want to call it that, I call it the intuitive voice, whatever it is. But really, listening to that voice to hear what is going on in the world. Getting over, just to like put it so plainly and not use the speak, getting over yourself to be able to connect with others, I think is like the outcome of that practice. And so for me, it has been that. It's been getting over myself, getting over my own insecurities and this and that, and my need to be the superhero, as you say, Avita. Like that's, I relate. So yeah, being able to clear that space out to be able to connect and know what's next has been the process for me. And in that process, the slide you're looking at now is my latest endeavor called Discerning Eye Community Agriculture. And really it came from a cleared space where I said, how can I, so first of all, like, what does the community need? And how can I provide that in a way that benefits more people than less? And, you know, through the process, I realized that food sovereignty and agency was a big thing that was missing in our communities. But I'll also say, like, the spark of this happened before COVID, but really when I came out with it in the public was at the very beginning of COVID, when you know, we were all locked down and nobody could go anywhere, and people that had less were really, really struggling. And that's where I knew that I needed to connect and helped build communities in that way. So Discerning Eye Community Agriculture began. I'll also say, and I'm very, you know, I don't know how to classify this. I want to say, like, you know, what a coincidence. Maybe it's lucky. Maybe it's also really unfortunate. But, you know, as the media calls it, the racial reckoning of the summer of 2020, I actually count as a blessing in so many ways, because it really shifted people's eyes towards what BIPOCs were doing and what I was doing. My unique ideas were finally able to come to the forefront. And you know, it's a shame, and I would have worked just as hard to get it there without that. But I really have to attribute a lot of this pivot in perspective to my continuing success in this new creative endeavor. If you want to go to the next slide. So just a quick overview. Discerning Eye Community Agriculture is made up of 3 organizations. And I won't get into too much of it, but really it applies to the 3 aspects of getting communities involved in the fresh food industry. Backyard Farming Cooperative encourages and advocates for hyperlocal gardening and farming. Deca City Provisions provides and facilitates access to the industry, and Deca City Farms provides access to growing possibilities, basically transferring green space to growing space. So I guess to wrap that all up, my process has been one of clearing and introspection to be able to connect with my community.
Thank you so much, Hawa. I appreciate the clarity that you brought to that answer too. Nora, do you want to talk a little bit about your artistic processes in your artistic projects or creative?
Sure. You can share slides. So in some ways, I feel like I don't have like that much to add. I feel like a lot of the things I was going to say were kind of touched upon. So I'll just kind of run through this a little bit, but process is really all, like, my work is all process. And, you know, especially because I don't have, so if you, yeah, that slide. So in being so focused on processes and how to get places, and what does that pathway look like to get to a certain point when we think about goals and the targets that we want to achieve. So how do we get there? It takes a lot of listening, a lot of deep listening. And because of that deep listening, some friends, have come to me about different project ideas and things like that. And, eventually sort of called me like a creative doula, just because I like to listen to, and help birth, whatever that idea might be. Most recently, the idea is a gun range for women. It's not so much about the product, but it is the process and the community engaged work. And there are so many ways to design processes that are inclusive. For me, it's really about building trusting relationships and listening to the needs of the community you're working with. So in all of my programs, I like to begin programs with a focus on the self, thinking about interests, hobbies, talents, finding any way that you want to contribute to your community, any way that you can make, any way that you can build. I really believe that we're all makers. We're all urbanists. We're all, even if we're living in rural areas, we're all creating and making and contributing to space. So the image that you have in front of you was a way that I tried to break down a process of opening up community engagement and community revitalization through working with a school. And so it's trying to break down the boundaries of the school, the boundaries of Main Street, to include, communities around creating spaces and pockets that bring intergenerational learning together. And I like to try to visually represent what these processes look like. It's an important foundation to have in guiding people to want to connect publicly through whatever endeavor they want to go into. So it's about creating confidence to take up public space. Like the newspaper is about taking up public space, being like, there are Arabic speakers here. We want to connect. We want to communicate. We're not isolated. We're not strange. We're not terrorist. We're not, we're not. And it's being, it's rather than being on the defensive, it's like, contributing. It's like, we're here. If you can go to the next slide, please. As you can, this is a little bit of looking at the who and the what of the Friends, Peace and Sanctuary project that I was a part of, that I was the project manager on. And, the goals of this project were about building belonging, creating belonging, and building empathy. Two things that really are hard to achieve in 2 years. It's either, you're really, belonging is really about community and finding yourself and seeing yourself in the urban imaginary in spaces. And it doesn't just come, with a snap of the finger by saying hey, just come together. Thinking about those two goals, these two big goals, and the idea of wanting to engage Syrian and Iraqi resettled communities, and engaging commissioned artists and Swarthmore College, it was really looking at how can we build mutual sociocultural capital. It's not just about taking the stories of people who are refugees and resettled here. It's about, recognizing that they're contributing to your knowledge as much as, you feel like you're contributing knowledge. And just by having connections to Swarthmore College are really important for people because it allows them to enter into other spaces with confidence when they're navigating how to move through the city. So this idea of using the arts as a tool to build the sociocultural capital that allows people to then navigate spaces in a more confident way is a lot of what this is. And so if you can go to the next slide, please. So this is trying to break down what that process looks like in the Friends, Peace and Sanctuary project. All of the different ways that we integrated storytelling into a variety of spaces. And, through the exposure of this project and these connections to these different, we were with the library, as I mentioned earlier, the City Hall. We worked with Helen Gim's office, a city council member. We worked with the Office of Immigrant Affairs. We worked with the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, and really brought an intersection to these ideas of belonging and and empathy. And so, you know, through this deep listening of this project, even though there was this end goal of exhibitions, an end goal of creating book arts by these commissioned artists, we really began to create spaces for people to highlight what they bring to the table, rather than it being about deficit, looking at, oh, like refugee stories in that way. It's really about celebrating all these different ways that people want to contribute. So, you know, through the exposure of the project, one Syrian woman turned her delicious home cooking into a catering business, and she cooked for Governor Wolf and an entire, you know, a bunch of state reps and whatnot. You know, another, you know, other people began to be involved in other arts projects and things like that. So it was really, it was helping people find their own artistry, recognizing that they're all artists in various ways, and uplifting that in all of the different ways we could. So like I said about the women cooking, you know, we had opportunities to do cooking classes in Arabic in the culinary kitchen at the Free Library. So you know, that process to getting to these exhibitions, to getting to these final products, was even more important than those final products. And then, you know, like I was mentioning earlier, taking those exhibitions and activating them to bring some of that process into that final space, to engage and activate that space. That's really.
Josh, should we ask the next two questions as one? I'm keeping track of time and I just don't want to lose too much Q&A time.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Sorry, do you want me to ask that? I can do that.
Yeah, I think it's your turn.
Cool, sorry, I've taken so many notes. I'm scrolling all the way back up. Okay, so yeah, these two are connected, I think, in a really great way. So what advice would you share for someone who's getting started, both as someone who may identify as an artist, but of course someone who may not? And are there resources such as books or videos or websites that you would like to share? And just for that, like, if there are, I think what we can do is Selena and I can catalog them and share them out as well. But if y'all want to share anything at the top of y'all's brains. And we can start with Jez.
Okay. I don't know if this is well, as advice, I would say listen to your gut. I know that sounds like very just kind of, I'm like, but yeah, I think that overall you probably are going to have to encounter so many or you're going to be in so many encounters with that involve a lot of people or organizations, and ultimately you are like the person advocating for yourself. And even if you're part of like a team or something, like just listen to the gut of the team, because I feel like that's very valuable. It's really hard, or for me it's kind of difficult, because I feel like people could have a way with words that things can seem one way, and then my gut is like no, and I'm like no. Yeah, and also I didn't really start practicing this until really recently, and my friend who is an artist just told me that I should make like a year declaration, and like her year declaration or previously was to defender el placer, which means defend pleasure. And I've never really thought about myself individually from this I just feel like I'm so connected to just making work that then I am all of the time answering emails and all of the time just kind of there's so much of my energy that goes away. And then I really like being outside, and I'm like, defend your pleasure today and take time for yourself, because I don't know, there's just so much pressure in all of that. I also think, I guess, like, in terms of websites, maybe I think about the Creative Capital website, because it replenishes like every month, and it has a list of either individual opportunities for people who are seeking funding, or people who are seeking residencies, even some like programming that is like education programming that doesn't really involve like higher education, or yeah, just like different sort of resources in that way. And they also share like micro grants, and a lot of the COVID relief funding has been posted there too. And like I said, every month they replenish it. So like if it's like towards the end of the month, they already have like the next month up. And I think that is really helpful for someone that, let's say, is working on a publication or anything like that, and maybe doesn't entirely have like the resources for it, and like locally the resources aren't fully for what they're doing. You could probably find something there. And I really kind of, I don't know, Creative Capital I think is like a really good, I have it on my dock. It's just like, it's like the first thing that opens up every day, even if I am not applying for it. And it's, you know, you find so many things that you can share with other people. I'm always, if it doesn't apply for me, I know it applies for something for someone else. Yes, do I, is that, that's okay.
For me, what was the question again?
It was, if you had any advice, Josh, I was just, not to talk over you, I want you to focus on your notes. But any advice you might have for BIPOC artists, and any resources that you might want to share too.
Okay, definitely. I would just say, like Jess said, just trust your gut. Like, you have to discern who you're working with, pardon me, and what they're seeking out your art for. Like, it's okay to ask a bunch of questions until you're comfortable. It's good to know that every opportunity isn't a good opportunity. All exposure isn't, something that you have to sign on to. And I think that's like really important, because a lot of times, like, we get ourselves into a situation where we might need money at that time, and we might not really believe in what, the person that's commissioning us for whatever art or creative activity. And we're in this situation where we have to choose between our dignity and our livelihood. And it's okay. It's okay for you to say no. And it's okay for you to pass up an opportunity, because, if it missed you, it wasn't for you. And I believe that dearly. Also, I believe that you have to get used to being told no. Everyone isn't going to like your art. And it's very, very important to ground yourself in your why, to know why you're doing it, why you're creating, and just keep revisiting that. Because it is like, we are criticized beyond pretty much every other profession. So it's very important for you to take care of yourself and your mental health when you take this on as something professional, because it's not always easy. I did write some things down. So another thing is, you don't have to keep up. Right now we're living in an age of, like, we're trying to keep up with algorithms, and people are telling us we have to keep putting out content. Right now, everybody is operating, and they're operating from home, so we're all online, we're all doing things virtually. So now there is this push for creatives to create content like every week or every month, and keep up with the ebb and flow of the rest of society. And it's very hard to do that. So I would just say, just stick with the pace that feels comfortable to you. Like, don't drive yourself insane trying to keep up with the times. At the end of the day, you want your content to impact rather than just having a bunch of mediocre stuff out there. That's just how I look at that. And there's a quote that I don't know who said it. I think maybe Jill Scott, maybe someone else. I don't know. But she said something about we are still valuable when we're not producing or creating things. And that's something that I'm also like trying to grow in my journey, to know that I'm still valuable to myself, to the people around me, to society, if I'm not putting out art or creating content or even working in the community. Like there's times where I need to take time for myself, and I'm still valuable even though I'm not doing all of those things. So just stay grounded and know that, you know, you're still enough no matter what you do or what you create or what you don't create. And resources, I would say, I don't know off the top of my head. I would say stay updated on like grants and stuff through the PA Council of Arts and just local like organizations such as the Seed Project. I really love the mission here, and just stay updated on opportunities as they come. I try to post a little bit I hope to post more to give artists more insight on things to look out for when they're navigating this.
That was awesome. I totally relate to all of what the previous artists have said. And I share the same challenges. I guess I'll say this, you know, just probably like most people, I suffer from the stories of, you know, I'm not good enough, or depression. And, you know, I definitely struggle still to this day with taking up space and dealing with those types of issues. So I think trusting your gut is a big one, but also to go a little deeper into that is like identify your gut's voice, right? Identify the voice of your gut so you can hear it when the stuff gets real dirty and muddy in there, right? So that's a real big one, I'd say, and I totally relate to the previous artists and mentioning that. Yeah. Also, the next thing I would say is participate. Participate in the art world beyond what you're doing. For example, while I was an artist myself doing photography and during the DECA days, the early Discerning Eye days, I participated as a judge in oh my gosh, a couple of grant cycles that happened. My memory is terrible. A couple of grant cycles that happened for artists in the greater central PA or greater Pennsylvania area. And that really helped me to understand what grant judges were looking for, how the process occurred, and really gave me a special kind of insight to be able to help the artists that I was working with at home to be able to achieve those goals. So, you know, without that intermediate, if you're an artist yourself, go out there and participate in things like maybe just a little bit outside of your realm to help, you know, sort of round out your experience of being a creative in this world. Let's see. And lastly, I think Avita said it perfectly, and I'll just second it. Ground yourself in your why. And again, I think that why comes from that intuitive voice. When you can clear all the non-helpful noise out of your brain and you really know why you're doing what you're doing, really nothing can stand in your way. And things may try to get in your way, but if you can really ground yourself in that, you'll be golden. That's all.
Just to build off that really quickly, I would also add to the why is like, to what end am I doing this thing or producing this thing? Where, you know, where is that going? just a few things to think about. Oftentimes we might take on projects that are confined by certain grant grant requirements or whatever. And I strongly encourage you to figure out ways you can push that budget to filter out to community as much as possible. We tried to do that a lot with the Friends, Peace and Sanctuary project, like building in more opportunities for people to be speakers in different spaces. I would also add, a friend of mine said that, in the same sort of realm, a friend sort of mentioned a few years ago this idea of a token tax. If you're gonna tokenize me, you're gonna pay for that. In the same vein, don't ever accept it's going to be great exposure. That's, one that is often used in replace of compensating artists for their hard work. I think one other thing to think about is documenting your process and your work along the way. Again, it's the product is great, but like, how did you get there? Where did and it helps thinking about other projects and reflecting on what I've done and things like that. In the funding world, competition and this idea of the scarcity model is very clear. Even when grantors, funders try to encourage collaboration, there's not really a lot of space there. So I just would be cautious of falling into that, rather than looking at how to cooperate with other artists and build relationships and learn from one another, and share resources. And to that end, also in any collaborations, the importance of really crediting each other as much as possible and, mutually uplifting each other, as much as you can. I think that lastly, just being open to learning, being open to building relationships, read to strengthen your philosophy, and like has already been said, understand your why and to what end. Some resources that I'd like to share are really not art specific, I guess, but a movement I'd like to share Movement Generation's work. It's a lot of just, can think about how art can be integrated into movement work. But Movement Generation is just a cooperative that really looks at ecology and our ecologies. And then next, a people's orientation to a regenerative economy. I can drop these things. Again, narrative comes into all of this. We're always developing this. So what are ways we can change the narrative in different fields? And then another website is the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, USDAC. That's another great source of inspiration of works that are out there. And then maybe reading Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Maree Brown. That's, some things.
Thank you so much. That's like my favorite book in the whole world right now. Such a good book. So I think in the interest of time, we'll pivot to questions. Again, where I put it in the chat, if you saw it already, I'll repeat it again though. We're really prioritizing BIPOC voices. So if you know that you do not identify as a Black, Indigenous, or person of color, please just hold back. But for any BIPOC artists especially, if you have any questions for specific panelists or in general, please either put them in the chat, or I believe you have the power to unmute yourself. And you can ask the question directly, and we'll just hold the silence a little. Ooh, Liz, I'm going to say more words while you're thinking. I'm going to also put in the chat, while I know Nora's putting links in, Evita put some links in, I'm going to put our link in for the seed projects, where a lot of these resources, the notes that Josh took today and other upcoming resources will be available on that website if you're interested in revisiting it. We'll also share things on Facebook, but if you're not a social media person, it'll also live on that website. So don't worry if you didn't catch every single resource that our panelists shared today. So we can open up for questions now. If there are no questions, I do have one more question I can ask while you're thinking. So we did talk around it, but I wanted to get a little bit more specific. So Josh and I were thinking a lot about in our project and in the projects that we're involved in general and historically, how do we set the standard specifically for how artists of color engage with institutions that are attempting to uplift voices of artists, specifically artists of color. And we're also thinking with the SEED project, since it's so geographically centered for us in the Southeast, it feels a lot like it can be a gold mine for the rest of the city and for other major institutions. So how do we, sort of leaning into what Nora was talking about, how do we navigate and call out tokenism in a way that is generative? And then maybe another way of thinking about it is how do we equip our artists from our communities with the tools and resources they need to feel empowered to address those issues? And I can pop this in the chat if our panelists need a reminder or repeat it. But if anybody wants to take that on, we can sort of popcorn style. So whoever wants to answer first, go right ahead.
Well, I don't have an answer for the entire question, but at least the second part. And I may have folks that disagree with me. I'm a little bit of an old school head, so you know that's just what it is. But at least throughout my experience being in the public eye and trying to promote my initiatives, I definitely had a lot of experiences being the token one, you know, and it took me a long time to learn how to say no. But before that, what changed for me was my perspective. And I said, hey, if they're going to use my face to promote what they're doing, I'm going to use their platform to promote what I'm doing. So it really became more of like again, a symbiotic relationship, whether they knew it or not. You know, I wasn't just going to be a face. I'm also going to take advantage of the attention and push what I'm doing. So, you know, as an advice against, you know, or how to maybe, this is not an answer to tokenism or how artists should deal with it. This is just my experience.
I definitely, I think I've also went through the same thing, like feeling like the token. How I've been navigating it recently is having conversations, like asking more questions. Like, for example, this is Black History Month. We have a lot of people reaching out to, you know, artists of color, especially specifically Black artists and Black people, and highlighting things that they do not highlight all year round. Or they will highlight something if, for example, in the summer, we were highlighted for a good time, you know, maybe quite a few months, and then it kind of died down. And I just asked questions like, how are we going to continue to have these conversations? Like, is this going to die down? Like, why now versus in October? Why are we having this conversation in February? So I just have a lot of, like, I engage in dialogue with them just to see where they are. And if they don't want to have that conversation, I don't work with them at all. And I realized that a lot of people or organizations, they wanted to, I don't think they realized what they were doing, but maybe they did, I don't know. But they didn't want to have the conversation. So instead of, again, centering our experiences as people of color or Black artists, they weren't doing that. They were instead talking about their guilt or their shame and what they wanted to do to kind of like move past that, rather than helping us like become centered in the conversation and see how we can work together to move forward, whether it's with their event, with their publication, or what may have you. But I think dialogue helps a lot, just to see where people are going, and what they're trying to do with you.
The only thing I would really add to that is taking whatever the concept is and reframing it and pushing back to whoever has presented it. Yeah.
Wait, I have this like big thing. I think as like as an individual, it might feel like, or like maybe like I felt like I have like no impact within like institutions, but then I've had a lot of institutions kind of like reach out to me and they're like, hey, like we, as in like everyone right now, have an equity sort of committee or something, and we're reaching out because blah blah. And you know, when you are an individual, you should be like, okay, who are the other people that you're reaching out? You know, what is like the group of equity that you're reaching out like look like? And I feel like as a one single person, you can create a lot of impact through that, because you can really judge as in, I don't know if judge is the word, but you can be aware as like, oh, maybe everyone's a person of color, but not everyone is a person of color who is queer, or you know, or maybe you don't know that, or maybe everyone is able-bodied, and maybe everyone's young. Because I feel like a lot of the people that have been reaching out to me, they're like, oh, you're like young, like it has to do with like the type of person that I am right now. And I'm like, well, would they reach out to me if I were this person where I were like 20 years older, you know? I mean, that also really matters. And I think that there's a way to navigate that as a single person, whether you are part of a group that is trying to manage or have a dialogue within equity or tokenism, or whether you are a single artist. Like as an artist that has singly had to deal with so much like institutional everything, you know, I think I have rebelled in ways that I'm like, I'm going to take all of the space because I realize that I'm the only person here that is making this like other work. And then it's reflected by the fact that they never say my name, but they always say like the Puerto Rican artist or something. And that's something that I've also had to deal with in like higher education, where I thought that I really deserved this opportunity and I worked really hard, to only find out that they would never call me by my name. They would say, oh, what is a Puerto Rican up to? And I would just be like, who does that? So just being, you know, when you are a token, you are on the side of being a token, but you are also on this, it somehow flipped and put on the side of like maybe creating more tokenism, because then someone's like, please come and be in our equity board. And it's like, what does that mean? And who are the other people? I don't know. I think it's like a very complicated or complex like scenario. And like you have to individually navigate it, and at the same time, not entirely for yourself. Right? Yeah.
Out to piggyback off of that, I also feel like when we get in these positions, I always pay attention who they have speaking to me. And a lot of times they will send someone that looks like you to have that difficult conversation. And that makes me uncomfortable. And I've been calling that out lately a lot, because it's like, if you don't want to have this conversation and you send the one person on your whole team that looks like me, to kind of, I don't want to say kind of dismiss my concerns and, you know, get me to trust them, to trust your structure or your organization, which isn't, you know, a POC-led organization. I think that's very deceptive, but that's how they, a lot of organizations and structures will get us to play into that tokenism. And another one is I like to see what my role is. Like, what am I able to do? If I'm able to come into this role or this position and make decisions and hire other people and create opportunities for other people that look like me, then I may feel a little bit more comfortable with it. But if I'm just that one person and it seems like that one slot is only for me and the door is shut behind me, I feel like that is like a big red flag for tokenism. And it just teaches us, well, it's telling us that there's only room for one of us in these spaces. And if you're chosen, I think it's very important for you to, turn it down or have the conversation so you can make sure that other artists that come behind you aren't, blocked to certain opportunities.
And to add to that, in terms of thinking about what tools and resources, I think it's really important to stress that cultural organizing and creativity also means being in spaces that we're not typically in. And so philanthropy, being in spaces of power, in philanthropy, in giving circles, there's a lot of ways to get involved in these things, both as volunteers, not even necessarily as work, but like even as work. It's really important to get into these spaces, to be in places of power, to make these decisions and directing where this funding goes and really shaping that. And then lastly, sorry, about tools and resources, just even sessions like this are really important. Really creating support groups that where you're mutually supporting and sharing resources about what the latest grants are and that sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that. I think that's my own selfish idea and goal is to think of ways that we can be more interconnected or intercommunal rather than our opportunities feeling like a competition or we're operating in that scarcity mindset. So it's a long ways to go, but I'm hoping that just through conversations like this, through folks being exposed to other BIPOC artists, we can maintain those connections. There's a question for Evita specifically from Adam. And his question is, what has been your experience with creating a publication? Sort of thinking about the process from idea to print. And maybe Nora, I know you've done some publication work too, if you can speak, maybe answer that question after Evita.
Yeah, he also asked what was I think he said what centering Black voices in the magazine. It was very difficult because of the times I was creating this magazine. I was under a lot of stress. I know a lot of people saw my Facebook post, and I was battling with systems and organizations and people that were kind of dismissing, my valid feelings about what was going on in our community at that time. So I was under a lot of stress, but still trying to research and stay grounded in the fact that I wanted to create this space, this genuine space where Black voices can be amplified and not exploited. And I just stayed grounded in that. And I started to pull in resources. I found people that were willing to work with me, but not necessarily needing to be like on the forefront. Like everyone that gave me information was not a person of color, but they were able to help me out and give me information and help me research and give me their knowledge on things to support me at a time that I didn't know what to do. Also, it was just based on a lot of research and just getting down to what I wanted out of this magazine, and everything kind of fell in line. So I put out an all call for contributions, and I got a few people that said that they would write, and I wrote a few stories in there myself just to give it some more meat. And I collaborated with other Black artists that wanted their work to be amplified in a space that, they felt comfortable and they felt like the intent was genuine and they weren't creating around a bunch of red tape. So that was how I kind of got that off the ground. I hope that made sense.
technically speaking, there's a lot of publishers and printers out there that print like Fireball printing and things like that create that make it accessible for people to create their own works.
I just want to chime in. Fireball Printing is a printing company in Philadelphia that anyone can go to the website and get any kind of printed material printed at.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking at the time and I don't want to hold everybody forever, although I think we can keep talking forever. So if there are any last questions, you can pop them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask them. While that's happening, I did put in the chat just a feedback/survey. It's in English only right now. We can get it translated and send it to the listserv again, and we'll send it to everybody that registered and post it on Facebook and do all those things. But we just want to get some feedback from y'all, see who was in the room, figure out who's missing from this conversation. But if there are any closing comments or questions, now is the time.
Well, I just want to add Selena and Josh and the rest of the team. Thank you so much for facilitating this conversation and allowing us to speak our voices and be heard. This is a really important space to be had, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Thank y'all. I mean, yeah, just I'm speechless over here. So we can't do this without y'all. And that's the whole thing. And that's what I feel like I've been hearing from each of you throughout this, is that it's a collective effort. So thank you. I personally feel very inspired by everything that y'all threw down. I would like to shamelessly plug Seed Project. So Selena popped the link in earlier in the chat. I can pop it in again, but we have 3 more workshops coming up this year that build off of this first workshop. So stay tuned, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook. We'll also have some publications coming along with each workshop based on these conversations, so that they're rooted in the physical world, as it's so hard to keep track of these things in a virtual space. So yeah, don't be a stranger. And if y'all don't mind, we'll probably be in touch. If you've emailed us, we'll probably be inviting y'all to all the things that we do.
Wonderful. So I think that's everything. We can, applause. Thank you to our panelists, to our interpreters. Thank you to Marcy for managing things in the background for us too. Thank you guys for being vulnerable and willing to talk this late into the evening after probably being zoomed out. So we'll hang out for a little bit. If you want to leave, you can totally leave. If you wanted to say something directly to us, we'll just hang out for a little bit longer. Maybe we can stop recording